G'day, this is Chris Savage from Ariel Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this session of the life of the Messiah from a Jewish perspective. I pray that it will be of benefit to you and help you in your Christian growth. Thank you for coming along. So welcome to this session. Tonight, we'll just do a quick recap of last session. As a result of Jesus's rejection by the leadership, he had a new policy regarding signs. The only sign he now gave to the nation was a sign of Jonah, which was a sign of resurrection. And we see that will play out in three areas: the resurrection of Lazarus, Mary and Martha's brother, and then the resurrection of Jesus himself. And then distant future, we will see the resurrection of the two witnesses during the tribulation. That's in Revelation chapter 11. The results of the unpardonable sin. What happened? There are four areas that it affected. The signs went from signs to the nation to the sign to the apostles only. Miracles from the masses without faith. Now it goes to individuals who have to demonstrate faith. It went also from tell all about him as the Messiah to tell no one. Jews only, not the Gentiles. Gentiles could keep telling everybody about him being the Messiah, but not the Jews. His message, it went from proclaiming his messiahship to concealing his messiahship. And his teaching method went from being very clear to now teaching in parables. Three reasons for the parabolic teaching. First of all, for the disciples, it was to illustrate truth for them. He says, unto you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. To the masses, it was to hide the truth from them. To them, it's not given to know the mysteries. Why? Because they rejected him. And also, it's to fulfill prophecy. At some point, it was prophesied by Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6 that Messiah will begin speaking in parables. So him speaking in parables is to fulfill Isaiah 6. We also looked at the five facets of God's kingdom program last session. We have the eternal or universal kingdom, which means that God rules everywhere for all time. Then we had the spiritual kingdom, where it's just God's rule in the heart of believers, and that went from Adam right down to the end of the Messianic kingdom. Then we have the theocratic kingdom, a theocracy, and this was God's rule over the nation of Israel. And it had two stages: the mediatorial stage, where we had God rule through mediators like Moses, Joshua, the judges, right into Samuel, the last of the judges. And then we had the monarchical period where God ruled Israel through the house of David. And then we have the messianic or millennial kingdom. What's that? Well, that's simply Messiah's rule over Israel and over the world from Jerusalem. And millennial means it lasts 1,000 years. And Jesus sits upon the throne of David there. Then we have the mystery kingdom, which is where we're concerned with. And this begins with the rejection of the Messiah in chapter 12 of Matthew and continues on till the second coming. And it now includes the true church, but in amongst that, it encompasses all these pseudo-Christian religions, which are people who, anywhere in the world, who claim loyalty to Jesus, and this is both true and false loyalty. So this Christendom, we call it, it encompasses all the pseudo-Christian religions as well as the true faith. Okay, so now with that, we now launch into today's session, and we're going to look at the parables of the mystery kingdom. And this we're going to see in Matthew chapter 13, verse 3 to 23, also Mark chapter 4, verse 3 to 25, and Luke 8, 5 to 18. These are all parallel passages of the same time where Jesus is speaking. Now, first up, we have the parable of the sower. And this is found in Mark 3 to 25 and Matthew 13, 3 to 23, and Luke 8, 5 to 18. Now, as we said we explained last week what a parable was, but just a quick verse is taking a story from everyday experience, from everyday life, and teaching a moral, a spiritual truth. So the parables we're going to see here, starting with this parable of the sower, this is going to lay out the workings of this mystery kingdom, because that's where we're at today, in this mystery kingdom. And we've got to realize that these are not just a random gathering of illustrations here, but it's actually, Jesus presents a package. It's a unity. It's a package of instruction regarding the different aspects of the mystery kingdom. And in these parables, we're going to see a number of different symbols are used. Now, many of these symbols are from the Old Testament, and we can work out what they mean. But Jesus uses some new symbols here. And where Jesus uses these new symbols, he himself explains them. So the parable of the sower, this is the first of his parables that Jesus interprets himself. And the reason for this is given in Mark verse 13, Mark chapter 4, verse 13. Jesus says, know ye not this parable, and how shall you know all the other parables? So in other words, we need to fully understand this very first parable, the parable of the sower, so that we can then understand the subsequent parables and how to interpret them. So Jesus spells out certain motifs here, and when he uses them later on, he doesn't have to go back and explain it all again. So the first parable, the parable of the sower, makes the following points. First up, the mystery kingdom age, where we are, is characterized by the sowing of the gospel seed. Gospel seed is the word of God. Matthew 13:3 says, behold, the sower went forth to sow. So he's sowing the word of God. Second thing, mystery kingdom age, there's going to be different preparations of soil. Some hearts and some parts of the world will have a more success than others. In Matthew 13:4-5, it says, some seeds fell by the wayside, others fell upon the rocky places where they had not much earth, others fell upon the thorns, others fell upon the good ground. So this is Matthew 13:4-5 and 7-8. The third thing we learn from this parable of the sower is that the age, this mystery kingdom, is going to be marked by opposition from the world. Because he says, where tribulation or persecution arises because of the word. And that's 13:21 of Matthew. And then we see it also from the flesh. We see it from the world, opposition. We see it from the flesh, where it says the care of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, choke the gospel word, the gospel seed. Verse 22 of Matthew 13. And then our third area of opposition is from the devil himself. The evil one, he snatches away that which has been sown in the heart of the person. And we see this in verse 19 of Matthew 13. So the first three things we see there is it's characterized by the sowing of the seed. It'll be marked by different preparations of soil, and we're going to have opposition. So far, so good. Now, this age is marked by different responses to the word or the gospel seed that was sown. And Jesus gives us 4 different responses. The first one we have is the wayside response, which we see in Mark chapter 4, verse 4 and Matthew 13, verse 19. And this will be the response of unbelief. So these, they hear the gospel, but they never believe. Because it says, as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured it. So nothing ever comes of this seed. And then secondly, in verses 20-22 of Matthew 13, we have the rocky places response. So we have the wayside response. Now we have the rocky places response. And he that was sown upon the rocky places, this is he that hears the word and straightway with joy receives it. And in verse 21, yet has he not root in himself, but endures for a while. And it says when tribulation, persecution arises, because of the word, straight away he stumbles and falls. Now, what we see here is that these on rocky places, these are people who do believe. They do experience regeneration. They are born again. However, They are never grounded in the word of God. So they are never stabilized or established in their spiritual life. So these guys are the ones who are tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine. They may be experience-driven Christians. They're not really anchored by what God's word says, but by what they experience. And so they're always seeking new revelation based on their experience. So this makes their spiritual life very volatile. Since they're never rooted in the word, they're never established in their faith, they stumble easily. And what happens is that they fail to achieve the understanding of the truth they could have had if their hearts weren't led astray. So these guys, they never mature in the faith. They remain spiritually immature for their whole spiritual sojourn here on earth. They never actually leave the milk, and they never want the meat of the word. And as a result, their reproduction is minimal. Now, we have the thorny ground response, and we see this in Mark 4, verse 7 and Matthew 13, 22. And this is Matthew 13, 22. He that was sown among the thorns, this is he that hears the word, and the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. So these guys also believe, but they never seem to be able to overcome the cares of this world. And what happens is that they become choked by the world around them. So while those where the seed falls on rocky places are not established because they were never rooted in the word of God, never digged into the scriptures, these guys may be theologically sound and have a good knowledge of the scriptures. They may not be experience-driven or experience-centered, but they still seem to have difficulty living consistent spiritual lives. Why? Because they're more focused upon the cares of the world, or in the cares of the world. It's all about work, profession, kids at school, everything else except growing in the Christian faith. So these things might be family, financial, could be social cares. Again, these guys, they're not stable, and so they don't produce the kind of fruit that they should. Now, good theology, bad application of that theology. So they do not reproduce what they should. So these also never leave the milk stage. Because why? Because they fail to apply the word in their lives. And then we have the good ground response in Mark chapter 4, verse 8. Others fell into the good ground and yielded fruit, growing up and increasing, and brought forth 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. See this also in Matthew 13, 23 and Luke 8, verse 8. So here we have the good ground. These guys also believe. So we have three of these illustrations here springing into life, born again. These guys also regenerated, rooted in the word of God. They found good soil. They dug down into it. And this refers to those who conquer in the spiritual warfare realm. And these guys reproduce. And these guys diligently study the word, and becomes the foundation for all that they do and think. And these are the ones who apply the word of God to everyday life, impacting those around them as a result. And what happens is they bear good fruit in their lives. And so they reproduce, some more than others, some 30, some 60, some 100-fold. So these guys are the ones who have progressed from milk, the milk of the word, to the meat of the word. So that's the first parable. So if we understand, Jesus says, if you understand the first parable, the parable of the sower, we'll understand everything that follows after. So now we have the parable of the seed. And this we find in Mark chapter 4, 26 to 29. And he said, so is the kingdom of God, as if a man should cast seed upon the earth, and should sleep and rise night and day, and the seed should spring up and grow. He doesn't know how. So this second parable is the parable of the seed, and it makes 2 points here. First of all, the seed sown will spring to life of its own accord. This seed, every seed, this seed especially, this gospel seed has an inner energy so that one day it will just inexplicably spring to life. It'll produce regeneration. Second, the springing to life does not depend on the sower. The sower has sowed the seed. It's there. It's just sitting there. Once he's sown the seed, there is nothing more that he can do. And so the gospel itself is the power of God that reproduces regeneration. And this we see in Romans chapter 1, verse 16. And remember, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul writes that this is the gospel. Messiah died for our sins. He was buried and he rose again from the grave. And that simple message, you know, when you share that simple message with someone, sowing the seed, that simple message believed by the individual suddenly causes an immediate regeneration that gives eternal life. It just one day, later on, it just springs to life. We can't explain it. It just springs to life on its own accord. We spread the word, the seed, and then until the harvest, man's work is finished. Our role, spread the seed, sow the seed. So the third parable now is the parable of the tares. And this is found in Matthew 13, 24 to 30. Another parable set he before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man that sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares also among the wheat, and he went away. Now, he doesn't explain it here, but he's going to explain it later on in verses 36 to 43 of Matthew. So we'll catch up there. This is the fourth one. This is the parable of the mustard seed. Remember, Jesus is explaining to his disciples the grand view of the mystery kingdom and how it's going to unfold. And here we see it's found in Mark 4, verse 30 to 32, and Matthew 13, 31 to 32. So we read the Matthew account, Matthew 13, 31 to 32. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is less than all the seeds. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the heaven came and lodged in the branches thereof. So the mustard seed found in Israel is as small as a grain of salt. It says in Matthew's account in verse 32 that this seed is less than all the seeds. And this is a proverbial saying. It is a comparative, it's not a superlative statement, meaning that compared to the seeds of those days, it was the smallest seed. It's a tiny seed. So this mustard seed that would normally produce a small bush is known to develop into a large shrub that the plant is even called a tree. But this one grows into a monstrosity. It grows into a huge tree, which becomes a resting place for birds. Where do we see the birds first up? In the first parable. Now, the point Jesus makes here is this. The mystery kingdom will assume huge outer proportions. There will be an abnormal external growth of the mystery kingdom until it becomes a monstrosity, huge. And this huge tree will become a resting place for birds. Now, as I said, the birds we saw in the first parable, the birds back there were agents of Satan. They came down and snatched away the word, the seed. So what we see here is these birds, these dirty birds, are now roosting in the tree of this monstrosity. So these birds are representative agents of Satan. So within this monstrosity of Christendom, under the umbrella of Christianity, there'll be various satanic elements, cultic groups that claim to believe in Jesus, but they all deny something essential, such as his deity, like the Jehovah's Witnesses or Christian Science or the Mormons, and you know, the rest of them also. So these are the birds of the tree. So this parable It emphasizes the external problem. It's a huge monstrosity, and it has all these mixes in it, and these dirty birds are just roosting in there. So this is the external. Now, we get to the internal. This is the parable of the leaven. And this we see in Matthew 13, 33 to 35, and Mark 4, 33 to 34. In Matthew 13, 33, the kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till it was all leavened. So this is the 5th parable, the parable of the leaven, which uses 3 elements here that need some explanation. First up, we have the woman, we have the leaven, then we have the 3 measures of meal. And when used symbolically in the scriptures, a woman often represents a spiritual or religious entity. And this could be positive or negative. On the positive side, for instance, there's the wife of Jehovah, Israel, and then we have the bride of Messiah, the church. So that's the positive. But on the negative side, there are the Jezebel, we have the Jezebel of Revelation 2:20 and the great harlot of Revelation 17, 1 to 8. These women refer to a false religious system. Now, the woman in Matthew 13:33 represents false religious elements that will be introduced into the mystery kingdom, resulting in spiritual fornication. Now, leaven is a symbol of sin. And we see this in 1 Corinthians 5, verses 6 to 8. And particular in Matthew, where Jesus speaks about the leaven of the Pharisees, which is false teaching. We see this in Matthew 16, verse 6, and verses 11 to 12 of Matthew 16. So what we see here is that false teaching is now introduced into the mystery kingdom. And the 3 measures of meal depict the fact that Christendom eventually breaks up into 3 divisions. We have Roman Catholicism, we have Eastern Orthodoxy, and then we have Protestantism. So we have 3 measures of meal, all with leaven in them. So all of these religious systems have this a greater or a lesser measure of false teaching. So the parable of the leaven then teaches that the mystery kingdom will be marked by inward doctrinal corruption in all 3 divisions: Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Protestantism. Now, we have the repudiation. We've finished the parables, except for one, the tears. We're going to get to that shortly. Now, we have the repudiation by Jesus of all earthly relations. And we see this in Matthew 12, 46 to 50. And then we have Mark 33, 31 to 35, and Luke 8, 19 to 21. Now, Luke, remember, Luke is the one who says, I write in chronological order. And so Luke says here, he says that he notes that members of Jesus's family interrupted his teaching. Apparently, remember, there was the idea that they thought that they thought he'd lost his mind. He said they said he is beside himself, which we see in Mark 3:21. So we have now the crowds. The crowds are so thick that his mother, Mary, and his half-brothers couldn't get to him. So this is where we are now. And so what we see here is Jesus was informed by someone in the crowd that your mother Miriam and your half-brothers were outside. They want to see you. It says here, behold, your mother and your brethren stand without, seeking to speak to you. This is in Matthew 12, verse 47. And then we have Jesus's answer to this. He says, who is my mother and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand towards his disciples and said, behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, he is my brother and sister and mother. Now, in Jesus's response here, Jesus now repudiates all earthly blood relationships and accepts only spiritual relationships. Remember, the Pharisees claimed the right of entry into the kingdom by virtue of their being sons of Abraham. Remember, they taught that simply being born a Jew was sufficient to enter the kingdom. But Jesus said about that was rubbish. The point here is that only those who are of the spiritual seed of Abraham are going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. The physical connection by itself is insufficient. And here he specifically mentions that only those who are believers in him as the Messiah are his true spiritual brothers, sisters, and mothers, so on and so on. Simply being a physical descendant of Abraham is insufficient to enter the kingdom. We have to be a spiritual seed of Abraham. And how do we do that? By placing our faith in the Messiah Jesus as the one who paid the penalty and the one who was our substitutionary death on the cross. Now, we see here, we're in paragraph 66 of the Harmony of the Gospel, and we see the course of the kingdom program in the present age. We had the public parables, now we're having the private parables. And now Jesus explains to his disciples the parable of the tares. And we see this in Matthew 13, verse 36 to 43. So after retreating from the multitudes into the privacy of a house, we see in Matthew 13, 36, Jesus now revisited a parable he'd previously given without any explanation. Parable of the tares. Now we find the explanation in Matthew 13, 36 to 43. And Jesus says, "He that sows the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. And the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. And the tares are the sons of the evil one." Verse 39, "And the enemy that sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are angels." Lots of people, lots of things going on here. Now, the tares, T-A-R-E-S. The tares, it's darnel, it's D-A-R-N-E-L. They look like the wheat while they're growing together until they're fully grown. And then that's the only time you're going to be able to tell the difference, until they're fully grown. So what happens is, until the ears of the wheat begin to sprout, the tares look very much like the wheat. So what's the point of the parable? The point of the parable is this. True sowing, which is, remember, sowing is distributing the seed, the word of God, the gospel. True sowing is going to be imitated by a false counter sowing. And there's going to be a side-by-side development as a result of the two sowings. And then the third thing we see here is that the judgment at the end of the mystery kingdom age will separate the wheat for the messianic kingdom, while the tares, which was the false sowing, will be excluded. So what we see is believers will be brought into the messianic kingdom, unbelievers excluded. And Jesus is using terms here that John the Baptist was using. Remember, John the Baptist spoke about the wheat will be brought into the barn or the kingdom, but the tares are burned in the unquenchable fire. And that was back in Matthew chapter 3, verse 12. So this is the same judgment as the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, verse 31 to 46. We'll see that when we get there. So what we see here is that this means that in every church, there's going to be peoples who may appear to be believers, but deep in their heart, they're actually not. These are the tares. There are also whole churches that fall under the umbrella of Christendom, but are pseudo-Christian in that they deny the element and truth of the gospel. They are also the tares. Now, the fourth thing we see about this is excuse me, here is that the essential character of each kind of sowing will be seen ultimately by fruitfulness or fruitlessness. Either they'll be bearing fruit or they won't be bearing any fruit unto eternal life. Now, we have the parable of the hidden treasure. And this is found in Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid, and in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. In the Jewish scriptures, we are told what a hidden treasure is. And when used symbolically, it refers to Israel, because we can find this in Exodus chapter 19, verse 5, and Deuteronomy 14, verse 2, and also in Psalm 135, verse 4. Israel is called God's treasured possession. Now, what's the point of the parable? Point of the parable here is that although most of the nation rejected the Messiah, God will gain a remnant from the nation of Israel. And it teaches us here that there will be a remnant that will be saved out of Israel. So there'll be Jews coming to Jesus, the Messiah, during the period of the mystery kingdom, which is where we are in today. The treasure is the remnant of Israel today. And we see this from Romans 11, verse 5, where Paul writes there. And also we see it is the Israel of God that we find in Galatians 6, verse 16. So this is the hidden treasure. The hidden treasure is the remnant of Israel, Jews coming to faith. Then we have the pearl of great price. And again, this is Matthew 13, 45 to 46. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is a merchant seeking goodly pearls. And having found one pearl of great price, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Now, there's no clear statement in the scriptures of what a pearl means when used symbolically. So we have to derive our determination in a different way. Now, all right, so we know here that Christendom includes both Jews and Gentiles. We know that the Jews are the treasure. So very likely the pearl of great price is the other side of the coin, which means it would be the Gentiles. So if the treasure represents the Jews, so it is natural that the pearl of great price would be Gentile believers. So it'd be natural to deal here with the Gentile segment in the next section. Another point of evidence here is that the pearl comes from the sea, and the sea in scriptures symbolizes the Gentile world. And we see this in Daniel chapter 7, verses 2 to 3, or 1 to 3, and Revelation chapter 17, verse 1, and Revelation 17, verse 15. So we see that the treasure Israel are the Jews and the pearl Gentiles. The pearl also comes from the oyster, right? Which itself was unclean in the law of Moses, but it was made clean by the Messiah when he said, all foods are good to eat. So the point of this parable here is that he would also have believers from the Gentiles. And the Gentiles in the mystery kingdom are added by gradual accretion. It's like a pearl develops when a speck of dirt falls into the oyster, or a grain of sand falls into the oyster. The oyster then covers the speck with calcium carbonate and continues to add small amounts of this chemical compound until by gradual accretion, it becomes a pearl. So one of the primary purposes of the church age, is to take out of them a people for his name. And we find this in Acts 15, verse 14. And it's to take out of the Gentiles. And this continues right down until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, which we see in Romans 11, verse 25. So these two parables represent the two nationalities that will be present in God's kingdom, the Jews and the Gentiles, which is the treasure and the pearl. Now we have the parable of the net. This is Matthew 13, 47 to 50. Now, the point that Jesus makes here is that this mystery age will end with the judgment of the Gentiles. The righteous will be brought into the Messianic kingdom, and the unrighteous will be excluded from the kingdom. Notice here that the net is cast into the sea. And remember, the sea is a symbol of the Gentile world. So in verse 49, so shall it be in the end of the age. So this is the end of the age. It's not the end of the universe. This is the end of the specific age, this mystery kingdom age that Jesus is talking about. So this judgment of the Gentiles is the same judgment that he speaks of later in this gospel. The judgment of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, 30 to 46. And we also see it in Joel chapter 3, verses 1 to 3. So in verse 50, it says they are cast into the furnace of fire. We have a parable here of the householder. This is the last. We see this in Matthew chapter 13, verse 51 to 53. A disciple to the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is a householder, who brings forth out of his treasure things new and old. What's the point? What point is he making here? The point he makes here is that there are certain aspects of the mystery form of the kingdom which have similarities with the existing aspects of God's kingdom program. Certain aspects of the mystery kingdom have similarities with other aspects or other facets of God's kingdom program, like having believers, for example. But other aspects are new, never found before, which is why it was declared a mystery. Okay. One-line summaries. One-sentence summary. Okay. The sower. First parable, the sower. There will be the sowing of the gospel seed throughout this kingdom age. Second, we have the seed growing itself. This seed, this gospel seed, has an inner energy, so it's going to spring to life by its own power. We have the tares. The true sowing of the gospel seed is going to be imitated by a false counter sowing. Now that's the first three parables. Now parables 4 and 5 are the result of parable 3, the sowing, the false counter sowing. So parable 4, we have the mustard seed, and this is the mystery kingdom is going to assume huge out of proportions. Remember, it encompasses lots of people who say they believe in Messiah. Then we have parable 5, which is the leaven. And this is also, again, this mystery kingdom is going to be marked by inward corruption of doctrine. Remember, three measures of meal, leaven. Now, parables 6 and 7 are a result of parable 1 and 2, sowing the seed springing to life. So parable 6 and 7, hidden treasure. Nevertheless, what we're going to see is that the Lord will gain a believing remnant from Israel. And the pearl of great price, the Lord will have believers from the Gentile world. So that's a result of the sowing of the seed and the seed springing to life. Parables 1 and 2. Parable 8, we have the net, and this age will end with the judgment of the Gentiles and the righteous brought into the Messianic kingdom and the unrighteous excluded. And 9, we have the householder. Some aspects of this mystery kingdom are similar and others dissimilar to other aspects of the 4 facets of God's kingdom program. Okay. Now, we see Jesus's power over nature, and we see this in Matthew 8:18 and 23 to 27, also in Mark 4:35 to 41, and Luke 8:22 to 25. So Jesus has just declared the new form of God's kingdom program. So now a whole new set of miracles are going to occur. But now the purpose of the miracles will serve as a training ground for the disciples. And in Mark chapter 4, verse 35, it says, and on that day, when even was come, notice the phrase on that day, it's the same day as the rejection, right? We've spent a couple of hours over this so far, but it is still the same day. So it's been a very lengthy day of activity for Jesus. What happened? Israel's leaders officially rejected Jesus as Messiah. He announced judgment on that specific generation for the unpardonable sin, on that specific generation. And Jesus then unfolded the secrets of the new form of the kingdom, the mystery kingdom that began upon that rejection, and he taught using 9 parables. On this day, he now orders his apostles to get into the boat and to cross over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He saw the multitudes about him. We see that in chapter 8, verse 18 of Matthew, and he was trying to get away from them. We see that in Mark 4, verse 36. All right. So this was a very tiring day for Jesus. So in Luke verse 8 to 23 says that Jesus fell asleep in the boat. Suddenly, a great storm hits the boat, which we see in Mark 4:37. There arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the boat, insomuch that the boat was now filling. In Matthew 8, verse 24, it says, and behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the boat was covered with the waves. In Luke 8:23, and there came down a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in jeopardy. So they're in trouble. The Sea of Galilee, if for those who've been there, it's surrounded on the east and west sides by mountains, hills and sheer cliffs. East side, you have the Golan Heights. West side, you have the hills of Lower Galilee. And to this day, for some unknown reason, wind will suddenly come rushing down from the north, across the lake, across the sea, which is between these hills and mountains, and it causes a tempest to hit suddenly. And the gospel here, the gospels, all 3 of them, emphasize the difficulty of the situation that these disciples are, and Jesus are, well, not Jesus, he's asleep. Mark verse 37 says that the boat was filling up, so they couldn't bail out the water as quick as it was filling up, so they're sinking. In Matthew 24, it says that the boat was covered with the waves. Luke 23, they're filled with water, they're in jeopardy. So there's a real danger to life in this situation here. Now remember, a number of these men were experienced fishermen, and they awoke Jesus for fear of perishing. So to them, this was a very unusual storm. And in Matthew verse 25, they say, save, Lord, we perish. We're going to drown. We're going to die. In Luke verse 24, they say, Master, Master, we perish. And in Mark, they try the guilt trip, Master, don't you care that we're going to perish? You know, so each gospel writer has a different view of this. But they all say that they're in trouble. Now, this is the first lesson. This is a lesson, right? The divine purpose of this first lesson for his disciples since the rejection is to bring them to a solid dependence on the Messiah in every situation. Remember, he's just been rejected. He's taught them the parables, and now he's teaching the disciples what they're going to be facing in the future. So he needs to teach them to be totally dependent upon himself. So in response to the disciples' request, we see in Mark chapter 4, verse 39, and he awoke and he rebuked the wind and said unto the sea, peace, be still. And there was a great calm. The Greek word here for rebuke means to muzzle. So Jesus literally muzzled the wind. And it was as if the wind was sent by the prince of the power of the air, and he muzzled it. Like you put a a muzzle and a dog. Two things happened after Jesus' rebuke. The winds stopped suddenly and there was a great calm. And that is two miracles back to back. The wind ceased and there was a great calm. The great calm came suddenly. It came just as suddenly as the wind and tempest hit. So it went from stormy to dead flat. Now, then comes the lesson to be learned. The disciples had already been rebuked for their lack of faith before the miracle. We see this back in Matthew 8:26. They were further rebuked by the question, Jesus' response in Mark verse 40. Why are you fearful? Have you not yet faith? And the Greek word for fearful is a word called adelios, which describes a cowardly fear. They showed cowardly fear during the storm. And Mark added, and they feared exceedingly. And the Greek word here is phobio, and that's where we get the root word for phobos, meaning fear in the sense of awe and reverence. The disciples were actually awestruck when they saw what Jesus did. So this miracle and testing was to teach the disciples, but what were they to learn about this? We see in Matthew 8:27. What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? And that is the conclusion of the lesson. What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Who is this, that even the wind and the seas obey him at his command? So this miracle is a visible repudiation of the Pharisaic explanation of his person on that same day. Remember, they said he was demon-possessed, doing everything by the prince of the power of Beelzebub. The lesson to be learned here is that he is more than a man. He is the messianic God-man. And contrary to what the Pharisees were saying, that he was in subjection to the prince of the power of the air, he was never in subjection. Instead, he was able to muzzle him and muzzle his wind. And now we see his power over demons. And we see this in the three accounts, in Matthew chapter 8, verse 28 to 34, Mark chapter 5, verse 1 to 20, and Luke chapter 8, verse 26 to 39. And here, for the first time, we have a detailed description of a demonized person. And in Mark chapter 5, verse 1 to 4, Mark particularly sheds light in what it is like. It's interesting here that the most extreme account of the most demonized state takes place after Messiah himself was accused of being demonized and rejected by the Sanhedrin, and that he was demonized by the prince of demons. And contrary to those accusations we saw back in paragraph 62, Matthew verse 12, he is not subservient to Satan. He is stronger than Satan. He now faced a man in the most extreme degree of the demonized state described in Scripture. This possessed man, he dwelled in the tombs and he showed superhuman strength, according to Mark chapter 5, verse 3. He wailed constantly and was self-destructive. In Mark, we see 3 to 5. He was extremely aggressive. We see in Matthew 8:28. And he approached Jesus stark naked. We see that in Luke chapter 8, verse 27. Mark stated that they had crossed over to the other side of the sea. We see this in Mark chapter 5, verse 1. So the Gentile side of the sea, the other side, was contrasted with our side, the Jewish kosher side. So the Capernaum, Cana, Nazareth, Nain, that's the kosher side. Now, in Mark verse 2 and Luke 8, verse 26, it says that they were in the country of the Gerasenes. Matthew says in verse 28, the country of the Gadarenes. Now, some critics of the Bible point out that this is an obvious contradiction here. They've shared their unfamiliarity with this area. Now, it says Gentile territory. This is the Gadara area here. So this is Gentile territory. They'd crossed the lake or the Sea of Galilee, and they're on the other side, the eastern side. And Jesus and his disciples crossed from the northwest side to the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee. The northeast side, Gentile territory. Jewish territory went from Bethsaida to Magdala on the northwest side. So Jesus is crossing over into Gentile territory. Why? He wants to get away from the Jewish crowds in order to teach his disciples. The Gentile side of the lake was divided into regions, and one of these regions was the region of Gadara, G-A-D-A-R-A. Gadara was both a region and a city. Here where we are in Geelong, we have Geelong, and then we have the city of Greater Geelong. But we have two Geelongs. Geelong is in Victoria, for those who are anywhere else. We have one referring to the city and the other to the greater area. So the city of Gadara was in the region of Gadara, but so was another town named Gerasa. And when Matthew uses Gadara, he's speaking of the overall region, and the other gospel writer simply emphasizes the city within the region. But keep in mind where they are. They're in Gentile territory here. A common manner of reporting at that time, we see here Mark and Luke mentioned one demoniac, emphasizing the more prominent individual, while Matthew mentions two, giving the larger context. So Matthew looks at the big picture. He says, "Oh, there's two of them here," but Mark and Luke says, "Hey, this one guy, he is trouble. This guy." Now, both of them could be demonized, but only one had to deal with a legion of demons. And after Mark describes the extreme demonized state, in Matthew verse 29, we see again that the demons recognize two things. First of all, they recognize who Jesus is, who Yeshua is. "What have we to do with you, thou Son of God?" So their recognition also included worship, see in Mark 5 verse 7, because they recognize the deity of the Son. Second, they also know their ultimate doom, the lake of fire, which is prepared for the devil and his angels. And they continue to address Jesus in Matthew 8 verse 29, "Are you come here to torment us before the time?" So they recognize who Jesus is, and they know what their destiny is. And here we find Jesus using the standard, the standard Jewish approach in Mark verse 9, when he speaks to this man. "What is your name?" And he said unto him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." A legion was 6,000 soldiers. In other words, within these two men were 6,000 demons. And this also again shows to the disciples just how much stronger Jesus was than Satan and his kingdom. And these demons do know that they're about to be cast out, and they do make a request of Jesus in Luke 8 verse 31. They entreated Jesus that he would not command them to depart into the abyss. Now, what is the abyss specifically? There's a place in the center of the earth that goes by the name of Sheol, and that's Hebrew, and it goes by the name Hades in the Greek. So Sheol and Hades are the same thing. One is Greek, one's Hebrew. It's in the center of the earth. Now, for reasons that the scriptures do not say, Jesus actually honors their request. So the request is in Luke chapter 8, verse 32, is to go into the herd of swine. There's about 2,000 pigs in the area. But when these demons enter the herd of 2,000 pigs, we see in Mark chapter 5, verse 13, what do the pigs do? The pigs rush down into the Sea of Galilee and they all drown themselves. And the question often asked is, why did Jesus allow this to even happen? And one answer is that Moses said you should not have pigs anyway. But that's okay, but we're not in Jewish territory here. We're in Gentile territory, so that doesn't apply. So we do not know why he allowed it. So now the two men who were demonized are now in their right mind. So they're happy. But guess who are not so happy? The owners of the herd of swine. So when the owners and others from the town come out, they ask Jesus to leave the territory, please. They saw the demoniac now sitting instead of raging. He was clothed instead of naked, and he was in his right mind rather than wailing uncontrollably. We see that in Mark chapter 5, verse 15. It was not just because they lost a herd of swine, but as Luke chapter 8, verse 37 points out, it says that they were filled with fear. They were filled with fear. Now, there were two men, but the one man who was the main problem, he now wants to become a disciple of Jesus. But he's a Gentile, and Jesus is not accepting Gentile disciples at this time. And because of that, Jesus in Mark chapter 5, verse 19, sends him to his house, family and friends, to tell them what great things God has done for him and how he had mercy on him. Now remember, Jesus had a prohibition about telling people who he was. He says, tell no one, except it does not apply to Gentiles. Because remember, he came as the Messiah of Israel, not the Gentiles. So he says to this guy, go and tell everybody what I've done. Tell everyone. And in Mark chapter 5, verse 20, and he went his way and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. Now, this man is going to have a large ministry, for as we shall see, the results of his work later in the feeding of the 4,000. The next time Jesus comes to the same territory, instead of being asked to leave, he is actually welcomed into the territory. And we're going to see that in Mark chapter 7, verse 31 to Mark 8, verse 10. And that is our lot for tonight. Thank you.